So I'm glad that those of you that are here made it on. Tonight is our very final lesson. There are no more. We will not be meeting next week. This evening, we are going to go over chapter 25, which is a very short chapter. I think I only came up with like 25 slides. And usually in an evening, we go over about 80. So it's quite a bit shorter than usual. And then after our lesson, I will be going over your final exam and telling you different things that you're going to want to know before you take it. That particular exam opens up tonight at midnight for you to take at your leisure until next Tuesday at midnight. So you have almost an entire week to do it, minus like a minute. So feel free to take it when you are ready to take it. It does require Respondus Lockdown browser. I'm sure some of you have probably used that for other classes, but what that means is that you will not have you won't be allowed to have multiple browser windows open at the same time while you're taking that test. The test is comprised of multiple choice, short essay, and a long essay, all of which we will be going over tonight. And for those of you that came to class this evening, you're going to get your long essay question ahead of time. So feel free to pre-write it and copy and paste when you get to that question. Which is what I have most students do, or you can write it on a piece of paper and retype it. I've had people do that too. Of course, first we are going to go over chapter 25, and then we will get into the final exam, and I'll answer any questions you might have about that. Sound good to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so for chapter 25, we are entering into modern art, or well, postmodern art that's made today. So we're going to be going over the different fields of art, starting with architecture this evening and what's happening in that particular field today. Last we talked about architecture, we spoke on the international style and some of the things that were happening in that. Just a reminder, the international style is a very box-like structure with large glass windows and a lot of use of steel beams, mostly seen in skyscrapers. Postmodern architects today are a bit bored with that international style look and are trying to switch it up a bit. Some architects are doing so by trying to add in some nostalgic architectural features such as classical or Romanesque styles. Other architects are trying to put their own personal spin on the international style by adding different things to it. Artists today are urged to study the local surroundings and what's popular in that particular area and work with the natural surroundings that you see in those cities and towns as well. So we don't have a lot of pristine square steel skyscrapers anymore these days. More architects are leaning towards making some more innovative choices with their style, sometimes even tacky choices, which is exactly what we see here with our very first piece by Michael Graves. This is the Public Service Building from Portland, Oregon. It was created in the 80s, so even by today's standards, this one is a little bit outdated. It looks very familiar and similar to a lot of downtown Midland buildings. So we still see influence from our international style here with our large block structure, but there's more influence from something called the Chicago style. If you remember our Chicago style building, it's a large brick building with small windows. It eventually develops into the international style, which is our steel skyscraper, but it has a few less windows, which is what we see here. We also see a little bit of a reference to classical architecture because Michael Graves has added in some faux columns on all of the faces of the building. So they aren't real columns, obviously, but he has referenced them with the design choices that he made. For this one, we have a column and some fake capitals, and on the other side, different columns with different fake capitals. Other contemporary architects like Tom Main are creating buildings like Morphosis Campus Recreation Center, which is a rec center located at the University of Cincinnati. And for this particular building, Main really considered in the location and the purpose and function of this particular building. He realized that he needed to create a building that did not make treks from class to class longer, but in fact shortened them. So this particular building is located in the center of the campus, and it creates, using different doors and pathways inside, quicker access across the fields instead of having to walk around the entire building. Of course, you can choose to walk around the entire building. I do that every day. I like to go on walks around the buildings. But this particular houses activities such as a cafeteria, a workout room, and a theater recreation room for students to use. So he's used a more modern design, obviously you can tell, to try to appeal to the younger audience as well. So you once again see some reference to the international style with the large uses of windows, but he's obviously strayed away from just a large steel and glass box shape by using a more dynamic architectural design. Does someone have a question? No.
Yes, what did I miss? Am I late?
Yes, you are late, Eric, but that's all right. You're here. Just make sure to stay the whole time.
I know, I'm sorry.
Okay, so that takes us into what's happening in painting today, and then we'll go to photography after that. So in painting today, we're going through a trend called neo-expressionism. Neo-expressionism just means new forms of expressing oneself. If you remember way back to chapter 21 and 22, we talked about the definition of expressionism, which is using art as a means to express oneself, not always using realistic objects to do so. So neo-expressionism does the same thing. It's artists that are using art as a medium or means of expressing themselves. Sometimes it is not quite legible to the viewer because they're using non-realistic representations of images, and it is their own version of expression. Not everyone understands everyone's emotions. That's how humans are. This is brought about in art history thanks to minimalism and conceptualism. Artists got tired with the very pared down, basic, some would say even lazy versions of art that were being made, and artists wanted to go back to more complex versions of painting. And that reaction is seen here. Rothenberg's blue head. So here we have a horse's blue head on top of a hand. She has used the color blue to express herself, and a horse and a hand because those particular images are important to her. So this is once again her expression of her feelings at that time. Sometimes people don't quite understand other people's expressions, but we're going back to an art trend in which artists are using art as a means of showing their own emotions and their own thoughts, instead of minimalism and conceptualism, which were very emotional creations. Minimalism, the artist that we talked about last week for that, Donald Judd, he didn't even touch his art pieces. He had a factory make them. Conceptualism, you're selling your idea, not actually making the artwork yourself. So it's a bit hands-off, and we're going back to things that are hands-on. Another example of neo-expressionism is Anselm Kiefer's Osiris and Isis. This one is on your final exam. You might want to put a little note or asterisk by it so that you remember it when we're going over the review in a second. So Osiris and Iris is Isis, not Iris, sorry, is a mixed media artwork made of oil, acrylic, emulsion, clay, porcelain, lead, copper, wire, and circuit board on a canvas. And it illustrates the mythological story between Osiris and Isis, two Egyptian gods. These two gods were actually brother and sister, as well as husband and wife. And according to the mythological story, Osiris is actually murdered, and Isis mourns his death until he is finally reborn again. I don't remember exactly how he was reborn again. I think that all of his pieces were put back together after he died, and then he came back to life. I'm pretty sure that's how that story went. But here Anselm Kiefer has decided to take a very abstract way in interpreting that story. It's not entirely abstract, though. Here you can make out the background of this architectural building which he's painted. It is actually a step pyramid. That's the early version of Egyptian pyramids, if you remember back to when we were talking about Egypt. This is right before they finally invent their flat-sided pyramid that we're more familiar with. They create shorter pyramids with steps, and that's what we see illustrated here. Most pyramids are made of clay, especially when we get to our step pyramid. It's not until we get to the flat-sided pyramids that they start using large blocks of stone. So that is one of the reasons why he has chosen clay. Another reason in which he chose clay is to represent the human body and how it is molded and shaped and comes from the earth and eventually goes back into the earth. And he has also used copper wire and circuit boards to reference our internal circulatory system and nervous system in our bodies throughout. So this painting is actually very textured and almost a sculpture. In fact, pieces of it will break off randomly at times because there are large chunks of clay and porcelain attached to the surface. So there's usually a little bit of a tarp underneath Anselm Kiefer's early works because they do flake off quite a bit. There's also usually a bit of a line around these works to keep people several feet back because there is lead being used. Lead is a toxic metal that you should not get too close to or handle. Therefore, they put a little protective line for you to keep away so you don't get too close. But lead for Anselm Kiefer is a pretty prominent medium for him to use, and he uses it as a means of illustrating death. So that once again references Osiris. He eventually dies in the story. He, of course, being made of clay, made of the earth. He has that human body, and eventually his human body will be put back together again, just like you could put back together a clay pot or a porcelain pot. And once again, those wires reference his own body and what was happening inside of it. And that is our example of neo-expressionism. Today, Anselm Kiefer is doing works such as this. This is his ode to a starry night, in which he creates a very black and gray canvas and then inserts fragments of diamonds into it, and then puts a spotlight over it so that it reflects the sunlight and it looks like a starry night. That's what he's doing today. Those were not well received. mostly because there was not as much depth or thought to it as this particular series that he did. Another example of neo-expressionist painting, one is non-European and non-American, is Fujita's Street Fight. Fujita did a series that was a bit of an ode to traditional Japanese woodblock prints and an ode to modern contemporary art styles like graffiti art. And we see that here fairly easily with this triptych. Once again, a triptych is a painting that is in 3 pieces. So you can see the seams are here and here. This painting actually comes apart. I have cat hair. And of course, you can see the ode to woodblock prints here with these 2 figures. Woodblock prints being very flat, but also depicting traditional Japanese imagery, which is exactly what we see with the 2 samurai fighters. But of course, he has referenced contemporary Japan with the cityscape in the background, as well as the use of graffiti wording in the foreground, as well as in places in the background. Fujita was originally a graffiti artist. However, he gained a prominent reputation in art galleries, meaning he managed to make his way into art galleries. And today he primarily just does gallery artworks and no longer does graffiti art, mostly because graffiti art will get you arrested. He also used gold leaf for the background, which is what this yellow bit is throughout. Gold leaf is a very expensive medium to use, and it's primarily used during the Renaissance period for religious paintings. So he's referencing not only Japanese history, but also art history there by using a very expensive medium, usually only used for religious icons, in an everyday pared down basic painting that's got graffiti all over it. So kind of making fun or poking fun at the use of that particular medium and how it can be used today versus what its original intention and purpose was. And that takes us to what's happening in photography today. Today, photographers are using the medium in a much more interesting manner. Instead of taking photographs of things straight on, they like to play around with the camera, trick people, and they have figured out that they can, well, the viewers have figured out that it's pretty easy to lie with cameras. And artists know that the viewers know that. So they have to be a little bit trickier with their camera work today than they were originally. And that's exactly what the artist Vic Muñoz does. Vic Muñoz will put about piles of garbage on the floor and create sketches around them, and then get up on a crane and take pictures from above. So this is actually a photograph of a large pile of garbage here that Vic Muñoz has arranged and of course drawn a man carrying it on his back there. This particular image is titled Atlas, and it should say Carlos is his name, not Carlo. Carlos. Why do you guys think, well, first off, who is Atlas? What is Atlas known for? He's from mythology.
He's Atlas. Atlas.
We know that. What's he known for? What's he do?
Carries the earth.
Yeah. Brock is trying to say that he carries the world on his back. So Atlas did something in mythology to make Zeus very upset, and Zeus punishes him by making him carry the world on his back for the rest of eternity. So here we see a man, and the trash symbolizes the world, basically. So this particular man is carrying the world on his back. There's another interpretation that you can make with this image. Does anyone want to take a stab at what the other interpretation might be? It has to do with classism.
Is it because like since he's black, he's on the lower end of the spectrum?
So it's basically a statement saying that the minority groups are the groups that actually help the world function. Without those minority groups doing those blue collar jobs like a garbage man, the world would not go on as we know it. It would collapse. So there's both a positive and a negative connotation with this one, depending on how you want to read it. And I think it's interesting to see that Vic Munoz has figured out how to make garbage piles look interesting. There's another artist that's contemporary today, and he will get large piles of laundry and make artworks out of that as well, like dirty clothes. So that's quite interesting that we're using those kinds of mediums today instead of your traditional ones. Our other example of photography is Walid Rod and the Atlas Group. This was a group effort between Rod and the Atlas Group because Rod took the photographs, but the Atlas Group actually found them and convinced him to display them. So that's why it's considered a group effort, even though the Atlas Group didn't actually take the pictures. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't see them. So the title of this series is We Decided to Let Them Say We Are Convinced Twice. It is a series of 15 archived digital prints from Lebanon during the wars there. So Walid Rod was living in Lebanon, and he witnessed and experienced a large amount of the bombings from those wars. If you're familiar, you'll know that a large amount of people died. There were a lot of car bombings, building bombings, and you didn't know when they were going to go off where. Basically terrorist attacks happening all at the same time, multiple times throughout the city. So it was very terrifying. Rod decided to sit in his apartment and take different photographs of those bombings occurring, and he kept those photographs for a period of time until finally he was going through his stuff and he showed these to the Atlas Group, and the Atlas Group said that he needed to publish them because he was one of the few photographs of someone that was actually there and experiencing those attacks. So it's not only a art piece, but also a record of history and a record of Rod's experiences. A lot of these digital prints are messed up. You can see it looks like an extremely old photograph here. That's due to the damage that it received from being in storage for so long and going through that war as well. And a lot of the smoke in the air affected the development process of taking the picture, which is why it looks so damaged. Now, as for sculpture today, sculptors today draw on quite a few different references. They tend to ask the different questions such as, how can shapes mean something? So some artists like to play on shapes and the meanings and purpose and recognition that they have in our minds. Other artists ask the questions of, what memories or feelings can I elicit with this sculpture? Others ask, when does a form take a shape? And then others still will ask, what will the viewer recognize? So for example, if you saw a sculpture of a cross, what would you think of? Probably religion and Christianity. So sculptors today are trying to use the power of shapes and images to really understand what emotions and feelings those shapes can bring forth in the viewer. The power of shapes, basically. And we definitely see that happening with Anish Kapoor. Anish Kapoor created this series of sculptures called To Reflect an Intimate Part of the Red. What this is a sculpted piece of clay that has been covered in pigment powder. If you remember when we were going over painting a long time ago, you'll remember that colors come in a powdered format. So he has doused these sculptures with pigment and poured some around the areas. But these particular pieces are portions of significant religious icons and iconography. So Anish Kapoor is trying to study what shapes have power and meaning to people. Now, a lot of these shapes in this particular picture are not from Western life, they are from Eastern life. Does anyone recognize any of the bits or pieces?
The yellow one looks like from the Taj Mahal.
Yes.
The top.
So it's not referencing the Taj Mahal, but there's a lot of different buildings that have a onion dome. That's what that shape is called. It's called an onion dome. And most of them have to do with Islamic mosques. So right here, he is trying to elicit from our mind and our memory the shape of an Islamic mosque, which does give you a hint that every single one of these images has to do with religion in some way, shape, or form, such as the mosque image here. And the one in the forefront here is the top of a Buddha's head. And if you want to know the others, you can Google them and find out and research. He's done other members of this series as well. But every single one of these is a religious shape, and only part of a religious shape. To see how powerful these shapes are in our brains and if we can connect them with memories or thoughts. Now, an easier thing to recognize, maybe possibly not, is Kiki Smith's Iceman. Once again, using shape to try to remind us of a memory. I feel like probably most of us are too young to know this memory. I don't know this. So probably it's beyond us, but the older generations might be able to recognize this particular shape. But in the 1990s, archaeologists found a frozen Neanderthal. And that Neanderthal, frozen in ice, was perfectly preserved, his entire body. And a bunch of magazines, newspapers, and news media advertised the image of that man. So Kiki Smith, seeing that going all over, well, not social media, that didn't exist then, but all over the media and news, decided to make a sculpture entitled Iceman of the Neanderthal's perfectly preserved body. So this would have been a very easily recognizable image for someone in the early 90s because it was all over the media. So once again, using the power of shape and form to try and elicit memories. This particular memory being of the news of the perfectly preserved man. And that takes us to what's happening in the public art. So public art is a bit of a newer concept. We haven't talked about it before in this class, but public art is art that's accessible for everyone and is made for the public. It's been around for a very, very long time. If you remember when we were talking about ancient Egypt and Hatshepsut's temple, she made that for visitors to visit and see all of the stories and the decorations. Same with a lot of the other Egyptian temples and palaces. They were for public use for people to see and look at and enjoy. So it's been around for a very, very long time, including the Parthenon and the Pantheon, just to name some from other groups of civilizations. But today, in the United States, in order to have an abundance of it, the US has a particular rule. So any building that is made using federal funds is required to have 0.5% of the building's cost spent on art of some sort. So a great example of that would be if you go to UTPB, they are partially federally funded, being a university, same with Midland College. Therefore, a portion, if they're going to build a new building, a portion of that money, 0.5% has to be dedicated to art, which is why UTVB has a lot of sculptures on it. Midland College, instead, we have a lot of paintings in our buildings. If you go to the Marie lecture hall building, there's paintings all over. Those are what we used with our money. UTVB instead used theirs for a lot of large sculptural pieces if you're driving by. Same with federal buildings and courthouses and things like that, and post offices. Those are federally funded buildings for public use and are required to spend 0.5% for art. So there are large amounts of public art today in the United States thanks to that rule. It's a very obscure rule that most people don't know about. So now you can say you know some law facts now. But for some examples of public art, here we have Ken Smith's MoMA Roof Garden. In 2004, there was an apartment building that was erected right next to the MoMA Art Museum, and the people living in that particular skyrise apartments complained about their rooftops being very plain and boring for them to look at MoMA. They thought there should be some sort of a decoration for them to look out at. These particular skyrises were above the museum, and they looked down onto that plain concrete roof. So what MoMA did for all of the people living in that apartment building, this is not part of that 0.5%, this is just because MoMA felt like doing it, was they paid Ken Smith to come and create a design for the roof. What Ken Smith did is he put a lot of plastic plants up there and painted the roof and put asphalt in different areas to make it appear like there was a garden on top of it. Of course, it's a fake garden, and it didn't have any real plants. This did not satisfy those particular high-rise living people. They wanted a real garden. They complained that it was a fake one, but MoMA was like, well, it's not plain anymore. You got what you wanted, and MoMA doesn't have to take care of any of the plants because they're all fake. So really benefited them, and I guess they don't have to look at a plain concrete pad anymore. A more successful public arts piece, and this one is made for the public, is Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. So for this memorial, they put out a call for artists to design and come up with an idea, and Maya Lin's was accepted. She was in her early 20s and still in college when she came up with this idea, so pretty good for her. But what this is a black slabbed wall that has been basically cut into the Washington Square to symbolize the gash in the earth, or the pain that was felt with the Vietnam War. If you're familiar with that war, it was not very popular. And on this black slab, you have the names in chronological order of all of the men and women who died and went missing in this war, starting from this side all the way down to the other side. The stone is kept very highly polished so that when you look at it, it reflects your face back to you so that you understand the reason why they were fighting that war was for you and to remind you of that. It's a very somber war memorial. Most war memorials are celebrations of heroism by showing off strength. This one, on the other hand, is very subdued and sad. It's a mourning monument rather than a celebration. And that also represents the fact that the Vietnam War was not popular in comparison to other wars that are more celebratory with their memorials. But this particular work is a public work for people to view versus this one. This one was more just for satisfaction of both MoMA and the high-rise apartments. This particular piece is another public works project. This one is located at a college, therefore it was made with that 0.5%. And that is Buster Simpson's Instrument Implement Walla Walla Campanile, which is located in Walla Walla, Washington, which is fun to say. This is like my favorite piece because I get to say that. But what this is it's actually a sculptural piece as well as an instrument, like it says. An instrument in a scientific sense as well as a musical sense. So for this piece, it has a solar panel that powers it, and it plays music. So for Walla Walla, Washington, in that particular city, their main source of income is the salmon industry. And if you are familiar with fish breeding, which you probably aren't because we're in West Texas, salmon have to have very specific water temperatures and pH levels in order to breed. And if your city's main income is based on how many salmon reproduce that year, you would like to keep track of temperatures and pH levels in the water. And that's exactly what this particular sculpture does. So powered by the sun, it has instruments linked up to the nearby river, which help keep track of the temperature and pH levels. Depending on that temperature and pH level, it will play different musical tunes. If something is off key, that tells you that there's something wrong with the water that you might want to check. And it does that hourly. It plays a song every hour. And once again, it is a public works piece located at a community college. Did you guys know that we also have a large structure in the center of our campus at Midland College that plays music every hour?
Yes, because of
didn't
Christmas music, I listen to it.
Yeah. Did you know that you can request it to play different songs?
Did not.
Now you
How?
don't know how, but I've been told you can request it to play different songs because there was one day that someone requested it to play the Star Wars theme. And it kept playing.
Is it off an app, like, or do you ask someone?
You have to ask one of the like student head people. The like head of student life or something does it. And
Oh, that's pretty cool. I did not know that.
not connected with them. I just learned my first year of teaching there that you could request them to play different things, which is fun. And that didn't know that there is a large structure in the center of our campus that plays music every day. It plays a different song almost every day, and you might want to pay attention because it's kind of cool. Or at least it's entertaining. And now moving on from public works to issue-oriented art. That is art made with current social issues in mind. A good chunk of art made today is produced because of this and falls under this category because artists today are very concerned about social issues. I know there's a really great show that's going on at the UTBB Art Gallery right now that is all about how the children that are being arrested at the border and separated from their parents are being treated right now. And it's a very interesting exhibition that is issue oriented. And if you're interested in that, I would recommend going. It's pretty good. Here we have Barbara Kruger's Untitled, I Shop, Therefore I Am. For this particular issue, Kruger was looking at how important consumerism was for Americans, basically saying what we buy is what we are. This particular image was taken from a Tylenol ad. So originally there would have been a Tylenol box here. She just photoshopped the Tylenol box out and put I shop, therefore I am on it, making a statement on basically how much Americans feel like they need to keep buying things, basically keeping up with the Joneses. This particular image was a silkscreen and was printed very, very many times. And eventually it was printed on shopping bag totes that you could purchase, which is kind of ironic considering it's all about making fun of consumerism, and it ends up becoming a consumerist piece itself. Here's another Barbara Kruger issue-oriented piece using Magazine Your Body is a Battleground, basically taking into account different social media and advertisements used today, which are trying to convince people that they need to look a certain way and dress a certain way and act a certain way. And here we have Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum. This is another one that's going to be on your test, so you might want to put a little asterisk next to this one, possibly. But Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum is another issue-oriented piece. What Wilson does is he is invited to go to different museums and he will raid their collections that are in storage and see what they've got and make something of it. For this particular Mining the Museum in Maryland, he found a large amount of these cigar statues. If you're really, really old and your family was very much into going on vacations to old, tiny ghost towns, you might recognize a lot of these Native American cigar statues. They were outside of almost every single gift shop in the 90s and 80s. So Fred Wilson found all of these statues of Native Americans in basically stereotypical dress, but he did not find a single artwork made by Native Americans. So they have all these stereotypical images of Native Americans, but not a single artwork by a Native American. So what he did is he put up all of these statues facing artworks, basically making a statement on race and minorities and how they are portrayed in America. The fact that they had all of these statues of stereotypes, but not a realistic thing in sight, was very poor on that particular museum. So it's kind of interesting that museums are still inviting him to go there today. But this particular issue is all about race and how race is seen and portrayed today in America. It says the 90s, but it's still an issue today. And that takes us to street art. Street art is pretty popular at this moment. It started to surface in the 1970s when paint available in spray cans happened. And it has just become more and more popular since then. Most people associate street art with illegal tagging, but there are artists today that are using street art as a means of beautification, as well as getting out ideas and concepts. And as you saw with Fujita's painting, they're also making it into the gallery scene as well. Most of these street artists understand that there is a risk of being arrested with their artwork, but they continue to do it anyways. And therefore, they have to be very quick with their art. So most of them will use stencils in order to tag more efficiently. If you don't remember what a stencil is, you can look back at your printmaking section of your book, but I think we all know what a stencil is. An example of a contemporary street artist that is extremely popular today is Banksy. No one knows who Banksy is. It is an anonymous artist from England that goes around and tags things, mostly poking fun of contemporary society. So here we see Banksy making fun of the fact that we used to actually hunt and gather our food, and now we just go through a drive-through and get fast food, so we're lazy. Once again, this was made using a stencil. Banksy also makes images such as this one, I want change, keep your coins. I want actual change, like real physical change, not money. That's another Banksy. And he has also made use of other people's tagging to make his own artworks. So There Is Always Hope was already there. it was put on by another tagger, and Banksy added the little girl with the balloon afterwards. And another one, Follow Your Dreams, was already on the wall, but Banksy added canceled and a man with the paintbrush over top. So a bit of a cynical, poking fun at people kind of mind. Other artists that are making use of graffiti are Retna and Risk. Retna and Risk created Oceans at Risk in 2011 using spray paint and brushed on acrylic paint. This particular art piece was requested by a gentleman who purchased a building that needed to be refurbished. And instead of staring at scaffolding during that development process, he decided to have Retna and Risk come in and create an art piece. You have to be pretty wealthy to do something like that. Instead of have scaffolding on your house while you're working on it, hire an artist to paint a very large mural. Which is exactly what he did. Retna and Risk made this art piece as an issue-oriented art piece as well. So in front of this large mural, they had a QR code, and if you scanned it, it would take you to some information about this artwork, as well as a website in which you can learn different ways to help clean the Bay Area and donate money to the Fund of Cleaning the Bay. So it's issue oriented in the fact that they were trying to clean up some of the pollution that was happening in the Bay Area in California. This also has a sunset echoed in the background. And over top, these are just non-legible made up images and icons and symbols. Eventually, the neighborhood complained enough that this particular artwork was removed and replaced with plain scaffolding, which I don't know why. I'd rather look at this than scaffolding, but oh well. Today, art that is made around the globe is very influenced by social media and what other artists are creating. Thanks to the inventions of telephones, internet, TV, airplanes, we're able to share information a lot quicker than we used to. That was a tough concept for my morning class today. We're going over art from the early 1900s, and they couldn't understand why Americans didn't know what Europeans were doing. And I'm like, well, there wasn't internet, there wasn't TV, so it was kind of hard to know what everyone was doing. It took a little bit more time to get information across the Atlantic. But today it's very, very easy to learn what's happening on the other side of the globe, thanks to the technologies that we have. And that leads to artists looking at what other artists are creating and becoming very influenced by those things. For example, a lot of artists are taking note of this particular female, Doris Salcedo. Doris Salcedo is working in Central and South America and trying to bring awareness to issues that are happening there on a global scale. And she's doing a very wonderful job of it as well. I mean, she's gotten arrested several times in her country, and now she can't really go back to her home because they're gonna yeah, it's not gonna be good. So she did a good job of bringing awareness to the issues. A lot of her artwork has to do with the corrupt governments in Central and South America, as well as the drug violence that is occurring in those areas. For example, she sometimes will work with the victims of that violence. So if you're familiar at all, you will know that sometimes people will just disappear. And she'll work with those families on creating artworks to remember them and whatnot. And she's also done a lot of series about people that were members of these gangs and cartels that tried to get out and what happened to them. So some very grotesque images as well, but it does get the shock value across and gain a lot of attention worldwide on those issues. She also does that with images and, well, not really images, but installations. This is an installation work, like silent prayers. So silent prayers here, we have 2 wooden tables with a large mound of dirt in between, and there's grass growing up in between the planks of those wooden tables. This is 166 different tables set out in this large room. It does take up the entire room. This particular table, each one is 6 feet long. And once again, they are wooden. What else do you know or can you think of that is 6 feet long and wooden? No one?
A coffin.
A coffin, yes. So she is trying to reference a coffin here with the use of the table. So it's a bit more of a muted reference. It's not quite so literal and therefore not quite as scary. But she's also referenced the coffin here with the dirt above. So below on our bottom table, we have the coffin that has been buried underground. But then on top, we see grass growing out in between. What do you think that grass symbolizes?
Rebirth.
Rebirth, a continuation, a hope. There is hope for the future. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. So she is referencing death, particularly she's referencing the death of those people that are involved with those drug violence issues in Central and South America. But she's also symbolizing that there is hope. It's not completely hopeless in this world. There is a light, and she is trying to illustrate that if we continue to work on this issue, maybe we will be able to fix it. And that's what this entire piece is about. Another artist that is working on a global scale and has garnered worldwide attention is Ai Weiwei. Ai Weiwei is a very prominent Chinese artist. Most average artists will know who Ai Weiwei is, meaning someone that's even just in art school will probably know. This is, however, a less known piece by Ai Weiwei. He's most well known for his dropping of very expensive Ming Dynasty pottery. But this is his Circle of Animal Zodiac Heads from 2010. This particular sculptural installation has to do with Chinese history. So if you're familiar at all with European conquest, you will know that Europe likes to conquer and colonize different countries quite a bit in history. One of the places that Europe colonized was China. And when the Europeans colonized China, they took a lot of important Chinese artifacts. One particular artifact that was stolen from China were golden animal zodiac heads. The zodiac is really important for the Chinese. It has to do with their year celebration. I don't remember what year this is. Is it the rat? I think it's the rat. But every year they have a different animal to represent that particular year, and there's a lot of different traits and symbolic purposes to each animal. So originally in very historical China, there were 12 golden animal zodiac heads outside of the emperor's palace, and the Europeans stole them, and China wants them back. They keep demanding them back, but Europe says, we don't have them. We don't know what happened to them, but they probably do. Most likely they're being sold on the black market. But Ai Weiwei created this particular reproduction of what the stories tell us about those animal and zodiac heads in bronze. And he put them outside in different major European cities, basically as a symbol of, we know you have these, we want them back, by putting them on tour in all of these major cities. And that's what that particular piece is about. And guess what? That's the end. So are there any questions about chapter 25? We went over all of the contemporary mediums and what's happening today with them, as well as some issue-oriented art. and some public art and global art. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Now, after I get attendance done for all of our latecomers, we can get to the main event for the evening, which is what you all came for. Your review for your final exam. Just let me get them marked on as present. Okay. So here's where you're probably going to want to take really good notes, because I'm going to be going over the different things that are going to be on your test, starting with multiple choice questions. Once again, there are going to be multiple choice questions, short essay, and a long essay question as well. And I'm going to start off with the multiple choice. For multiple choice, there's only going to be 4 answer choices. One of them will be correct. It's kind of how multiple choice works. The first thing that you're going to want to understand as far as multiple choice is concerned is different examples of neo-expressionism. So tonight we talked about neo-expressionism in painting, and we talked about 3 artists. Can anyone remember those 3 artists' names? I'll give you a refresher. The first one was the female artist that did the horse with the blue head in the hand. Does anyone remember her name? Well, you're going to want to know it. You guys are going to want to know your neo-expressionist artists that we just talked about tonight, because it's a question on the test. The other, so first off, that neo-expressionist artist, the female, is Susan Rothenberg. You're going to want to know her and what she does. Susan Rothenberg. The second neo-expressionist artist that we talked about this evening was Anselm Kiefer. So you're going to want to remember his paintings. I forgot to mention to you, Anselm Kiefer, if you're really interested in his artwork, he has about 3 of them on permanent collection at the Fort Worth Modern Museum. And other countries are very, very jealous that we have 3 of his most important artworks in Texas. That's kind of cool. And then the last neo-expressionist artist is Fujita and his street fight painting. So those are your neo-expressionist artists. The second multiple choice question is what inspired Picasso to create Les Demoiselles d'Avignon? Or who, what or who? There is a what and there is a who. So what inspired Pablo Picasso to create Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, or the Ladies of Avignon is what it means in English. Question number 3, Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum is mostly an issue about what subject? Does anyone remember what subject? We just looked at that one too. That was the one with the Native American statues. Am I talking to myself here? Anyone here? Nobody remembers the issue that Fred Wilson was concerned with?
Social issue with the Native Americans.
With race, yeah. Very good, Brock. Thank you. Now I know that you guys can hear me, because I felt like for a second you couldn't hear me because no one was talking. Next, you're going to want to know what Jacob Lawrence is a product of. It was a particular Renaissance, but not the Italian one. It came about way after that era. So you're going to want to look up Jacob Lawrence and see what he was a product of.
Wait, who again?
Jacob Lawrence, we talked about him last week. Next, you're going to want to know who Vic Munoz is and what he does with his photography. We just talked about him. Does anyone remember what Vic Munoz does with his photography that's so different? That was the Atlas photograph. What did he do to make his composition? Some of y'all need to take some better notes.
Was it like holding the world situation?
Yeah, it was that one. It was the one that he was holding the world, but what was he actually holding? It wasn't the world.
Trash, the trash.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Alba.
Of course, of course.
Next question, you are going to want to know what technology Marcel Duchamp used to create Nude Descending a Staircase #2. That was another one that we looked at for chapter 22. So if you can't remember what technology he used, it's in chapter 22. It's at the very end of chapter 22 on the second to last page.
Wasn't he did like the use the different like the toilet and
So he is that artist, but we talked about Nude Descending the Staircase that previous chapter. So he is the one that used the toilet, but the technology that he used to make the painting Nude Descending the Staircase is not a toilet. It was a particular camera. And like I said, it's in chapter 22 at the very end, for anyone that doesn't remember. And I mostly remember that because we just taught it this morning in my morning class. That's what they're on right now. So the next question is, what particular art movement was Richard Hamilton a part of? Richard Hamilton was an English artist, and he created the collage, which included the Tootsie Roll Pop and the Muscle Man and the naked female in the canned ham. So what movement was Richard Hamilton a part of?
Pop art.
Yes, very good, Brock. The next question is, where did constructivism start in? What country? The same country that suprematism is from, and the same country that is known for their socialist tendencies.
Germany?
Not Germany,
Russia.
Russia. And the next question is about Fauvism, and it is discussing the characteristics of Fauvist artists. The Fauves were known by critics as the wild beasts because of their peculiar choices in color. So if you remember them, they were the guys that would paint tree trunks green and people pink and rivers green. So interesting color choices is what they're most known for. And the next question is, what is Doris Salcedo's Silent Prayers artwork all about? What's the purpose? We just talked about that one. Anyone remember Doris Salcedo's artwork's purpose?
The issues of what's going on in Latin America.
Yes, so it is mourning those that were killed in gang violence, as well as celebrating the fact that there is some hope. Very good. The next question, you need to know who your feminist artists are. We talked about them last week. So keep in mind the works of the artists Judy Chicago, Nancy Spiro, and Ana Mendieta in order to answer that question. Know your feminist artists. Just a reminder, that is chapter 24 in your book. The next question, you're going to want to know what art style Piet Mondrian invented. That is chapter 23. And it is called De Stijl, or the style. Piet Mondrian was known for using primary colors and black horizontal and vertical lines. And our final multiple choice question is about surrealism. Know who your surrealist artists are and what surrealism is. Know who your surrealist artists are and what surrealism is. And that takes me to the topics of your short essays. Short essays should be about 5 sentences long. 3 to 5. And your first short essay question is about the 2 German expressionist groups that we talked about in chapter 22. They're the very, very beginning of chapter 22. What are the 2 German expressionist groups? Who were the members? What are they known for? What are some of their artworks? You do not need to Google anything to find those answers. They're all in the textbook in about a paragraph. So that would save you some time. Or you can look back at that particular recording where all of the answers are there as well. In fact, when people Google the answers, I know very quickly because they list every single group member's name, and I did not teach you all of the group members' names because they are not all relevant. So I would recommend checking out your book or the recordings for that answer. Once again, that first short essay question is, what are the 2 German expressionist groups? You're going to want to know some of the artists, particularly the ones that we talked about, not the random ones that we didn't talk about. Some of the artworks that they made, and particularly the characteristics that are associated with them. And your second short essay question is about American regionalism. That was from last week. So know what American regionalism is, know a couple of the artists and some of their artworks. And that takes me to your long essay. For this one, I do give you guys the entire essay ahead of time. I am going to put it in your chat. So give me a second, and I'm also going to read it verbally. So your long essay question is in the chat and you can pre-write it. That is fine. I'm not gonna dock you points for pre-writing it. But the question is, during World War II, the epicenter of the art world shifted from Paris to New York. Along with this shift was major changes in the art styles and trends produced in the United States as European artists migrated to the United States, bringing with them new ideas and techniques. In detail, please explain the ways that European immigrants affected American artists and art styles during and immediately after World War II. Please use examples when expressing thoughts on this subject. Also suggest some of the reasons for these changes. So I said during and immediately after World War II. That means not very long after, like a few years after. So that means you're going to want to look at those abstract expressionist artists, not pop art. For some reason for this essay, a lot of people go into pop art, and that was made in the late 60s, early 70s. That's quite a long time after World War II in art history terms. So look at art that's produced immediately after World War II. So we're talking about abstract expressionism, the works of Rothko and de Kooning and all of those guys, Helen Frankenthaler, and see how they were influenced by European artists that immigrated. For example, Rothko studied under several European artists that were teaching at university, particularly teaching color theory. So that's one way in which European artists influenced American artists, is that they taught them. Of course, with the immigration, they brought also a lot of their artworks and their ideas with them and shared them to the United States. But think about what America was making before World War II and how that suddenly changed during World War II with the influx of Europeans. What happened there? That's what that particular essay is about. Feel free to write it ahead of time, or you can write it during a test. You have 2 hours to take your final exam. I literally went over every single question with you just now. There's not going to be a surprise one on there randomly thrown in. Not going to do that. But once again, you have 2 hours. It does open at midnight tonight, and it closes next Tuesday at midnight. So don't procrastinate. Take it as soon as you can and get it done. After you're done with your final, you're done with this class, which is good news probably for some of you, because I'm sure some of you are ready to get on with your break and go back to some normalcy on your Tuesday nights. That being said, I am going to miss a lot of you guys because I do enjoy our conversations on Tuesdays. For some of you that come later, you might not know this, but those that log on early, I get to know a lot about them, and I am going to miss having those individual conversations with you guys one-on-one, and it has been really nice to get to know every single one of you. And if you ever get the opportunity, I would love to have you as a student again. I am teaching an art history class next semester, but unfortunately it's in the mornings. But if you do have the opportunity to take it, I would once again love to have you guys as students, because I have really enjoyed myself this semester with you guys and had a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys had fun too. Last but not least, what's it called? The student survey is available for this course for the rest of this week. It closes on Friday. It is located on your Canvas page under your little tabs on the left side. If you do that survey, what it does is it helps me know what I need to work on and things that I need to do differently in the future, and it helps me produce a better class. So please, if you have free time, fill out that survey and help me do a better job at my job. I do take into account all of that feedback. And of course, if you want to leave positive feedback, that's really nice too, because I like to hear positivity sometimes myself. But of course, if you have criticism, let me know there so that I can fix that in the future. That being said, once again, I loved having you guys this semester, And if you have any questions about the final exam or anything else in this class, feel free to email me or call me or text me, and I will try my best to help you out as much as possible before the semester ends. Best of luck on your finals. And once again, if you have any questions, let me know. Just a reminder, this lesson was recorded and I'm going to have it posted within the next 15 minutes for anyone that needs to rewatch stuff.